like I think we're like starting to know.
Bonnie, scoot over. Y'all ready? Oh, I'll wait for Dr. Debbie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ghost to post. That's lit. Ghost to post. We just get a little.
Okay, great. Okay. All right.
Where do you want that?
Stand next to us.
All right.
We're all of our speakers. Let's give her to the left. Yes. Where's Zach? Zach, where are you? Where's Zach?
Zach. Right here. Okay, right there.
All right. Oh, come on over too. Oh, you want to do the same thing? Sorry, we don't have another set of hands.
You're brave.
Okay. All right. All right, we're gonna get started. Yeah.
You don't have a stand? You got a stand in the truck? Oh, that's right.
No, I mean there's no other.
Quarter. Oh. I
No. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. If you want us to handhold it while we're
Yeah,
talking.
we can do that.
Oh yeah, we could do that. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. We thought you wanted a little podium. I'll do the opening. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Debbie Almantasser. I am one of the co-founders of the Yemeni American Merchants Association, a nonprofit that was birthed out of the resistance against the Muslim ban in 2017 through its popular and famous bodega strike, where we shut down 1,000 bodegas and held a rally of over 6,000 Yemeni Americans at Brooklyn Borough Hall. We've continued the work to support our community, the merchants and bodega owners, and one of these ways that we've supported them is after getting a call from them about the New York Post front page cover of the burning towers and Representative Ilhan Omar's comments taken out of context. They were outraged and terrified of what they saw and acted by calling us as an organization and saying they wanted to take some action. The action that they decided to take was to boycott the New York Post. We are here 30 days later to talk about what we have done and our communication with the New York Post. I will now turn it over to Yusuf to give you more background on the last 30 days and our demands of the New York Post.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm Yusuf Mubaraz. I'm a member of the Yemeni American Merchants Association. So, on April 11th, the New York Post published a cover with the Twin Towers in flames alongside Representative Ilhan Omar's comments that were abusively taken out of context from her speech she gave in March, in which she was actually distancing American Muslims from terrorists on 9/11. The point she was making in that speech, one that somehow escaped the Post and other right-wing press, was that the actions of the 19 men who committed the horrific attacks of 9/11 should not be held against a billion Muslims around the world. The Post's coverage is more than just inaccurate. It's irresponsible and downright dangerous. It has not only resulted in direct death threats against Omar, but has incited violence, hate, and bigotry against all American Muslims and minorities across the United States.
Right on.
The Congresswoman is a reflection of our communities across this diverse nation. She is Muslim, she is black, she is a woman, and she is a refugee. We cannot allow tabloid journalism and the Post fear-mongering tactics to further victimize our communities of color who already suffer several hundred targeted assaults every year. We, the Yemeni American Merchants Association, are here to announce the formation of the Boycott New York Post Coalition. After the New York Post editorial board ignored our request for a meeting to discuss the following demands that were released on April 14th, following the demonization of Representative Omar. So, our demands are as follows. We demand a public apology to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Muslim Americans, and minorities who have been persistently victimized by the New York Post propaganda, which spreads nothing but hate and fear on the streets of New York City and across the country. We demand more responsible and nuanced reporting that takes racism and Islamophobia into consideration and accountability for sensationalist stories that undermine national unity and incite violence and hate against minority communities for the sole purpose of profit. We demand the firing of New York Post editor-in-chief Stephen Lynch, who has demonstrated a clear viciousness and intent to spread racism and hysteria that leads to violence against our communities, especially in times when Islamophobia is at its highest. We demand that elected officials, government officials, stop giving the New York Post any public platforms to spread hate and racism in this multicultural city and across the nation at large. I'll now hand it off to Debbie, who will give you our progress following these 30 days.
Thank you, Yusuf. As Yusuf has mentioned, we contacted the New York Post last week and got radio silence. Their silence has left us with no alternative but to call for an indefinite boycott of the New York Post.
Right on.
We are proud to announce that the 900 bodegas of the 5,000 proud have made an impact within the 30 days of the boycott. Within the 30 days, we have stopped the sale of 9,000 papers daily, equating to the loss of $270,000 in revenue in the last 30 days of the boycott. Though it may have been the story about Representative Ilhan Omar that sparked our boycott, the New York Post attacks on Omar is only the latest in a series of racist coverage stretching back at least 30 years, which together constitute an affront not only on journalistic accuracy, but to the values of our country that our country strives to uphold. 30 years ago, the New York Post was one of the many newspapers who skewed coverage of the so-called Central Park Five,
Right on.
may well have contributed to the jail sentences of the accused. In that now famous 1989 case, 5 young men of color were accused of raping and murdering a white woman jogger, and each served several years in prison until their 2002 exoneration, at which point a convicted murderer's DNA was found at the scene. But the New York Post's racist take on the case remains alive in their newsroom. In 2013, the paper published an editorial absurdly claiming that there is strong evidence to support the guilt of the 5 young men. Back in 2009, the subject of the New York Post's latest racist print was none other than President Barack Hussein Obama. On February 18th, the newspaper ran an editorial cartoon depicting 2 policemen shooting a chimpanzee, a comment hovering over their heads. The comment said, "They'll have to find someone else to write the next stimulus bill." Obama had signed that bill into law 1 day prior. The cartoon drew shock and condemnation from many, including civil rights activist Al Sharpton and the state governor. The cartoon's significance was not only obvious, it was despicable. The New York Post was printing an age-old racist stereotype equating African Americans with apes. Lest we assume that the New York Post only traffics in anti-black bigotry, we must also recall a 2014 racist cover story depicting Japanese baseball player Masahiro Tanaka, newly signed with the Yankees, as a Kamizaki bomber. And in quotes, it said 155 million Bronx bomber. The headline screamed over a photo of Tanaka poorly photoshopped as a pilot of a World War II era Japanese plane. After that, the Asian American Journalists Association wrote a shock letter to the newspaper's managing editor. The New York Post changed the cover in subsequent prints, but no apology was issued, and none of the racist copies were destroyed. So as the New York Post considers our demands, my fellow Yemeni Americans and I have one message for that publication. Enough is enough of twisting racist stereotypes to stoke fear among our communities. Enough running attention-grabbing news coverage that only misinforms the public, but endangers the very communities members we serve. And no matter how the Post responds, the bodega owners and I will continue to stand up for the safety and dignity of our nation's communities of color. This campaign is built to be intersectional. Yama is proud to announce the next phase of the boycott of the New York Post. We have formed a coalition titled Boycott New York Post Coalition, consisting of diverse organizations and individuals who will collectively work with Yama to roll out a robust campaign. We will double up our efforts across the city to get the rest of the 5,000 Yemeni bodega owners to join the boycott, and we will also get other ethnic and racial groups on board. We are going to print an additional 3,000 posters in Bengali and Spanish. Thank you so much.
Oh.
Say his name.
I want to introduce Hawk from Black Lives Matter.
Ghost the Post! 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 Right on. When I was a kid growing up in the Bronx, I realized early that no one bought the New York Post. We always had different papers in our house. So I said, Dad, why don't we read the New York Post? He said, son, because that newspaper is racist. Let's talk about their hatred of black people. As the founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York, what I see time after time again is the New York Post taking a pro-police approach. Even when politicians and even when some officers ignore coming together to say that we will ghost the Post, to say that we will boycott the New York Post, to say that we will drive them into bankruptcy. Why? Because the power is in the people. Yes. Look around me. Woo. You see Muslims, you see Jews, you see men, you see women, you see trans folks. We all stand united to tell the New York Post that their days are numbered. Yeah.
Next, we have Ahmed Muhammad from CARE New York.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. My name is Ahmed Mohammed. I'm the litigation director for CARE New York. CARE is a New York civil rights and advocacy organization right here in the state of New York. So just last week, we actually released our Islamophobia report entitled Hijacked by Hate, which outlined how mainstream organizations are funding hate groups. And let me tell you, there's very few organizations that are more mainstream in sending out hate junk than News Corp and the New York Post. And Representative Ilhan Omar's cover and the coverage related to Representative Ilhan Omar, that is not the beginning. It is just the last step what has led us here today. Over the years, the New York Post has targeted not only immigrants, not only Muslims, not only African Americans, but anyone who is not white, European heritage, and does not spew hate and conservative policies. If you don't fit into that category, you will end up on the New York Post cover, misaligned and defamed. We're here today to tell the New York Post that we are rallying together. We're going to fight their hate. We're going to come together, and we're going to say no more hate in New York City. As my brother Hawk mentioned earlier, we will ghost the Post, and their days are numbered. Thank you.
Next we have Zakaria from Take on Hate.
Good morning, everyone. Campaign to Take on Hate is proud to join the Boycott New York Post Coalition. We are an organization that works to take on anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism across the country and bigotry against all people. The New York Post has a long history of racism. This is not something new. So we're here to say we are proud to join the coalition. There is organized systemic racism that is not just coming from the corporate media, it's coming from our elected officials as well, working together in a systemic way. So we understand that hate crimes against Muslims and Arabs have been on the rise in the past couple of years. There's been a 91% increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes in 2017. So we know that this rise is directly tied to this corporate hatred that is being spewed against us. And there are real consequences here when it comes to the media. These hate crimes are affecting everyday people on their way to work, on their way home, just trying to get home from work. So we are really proud to join this coalition, and we will out-organize them.
Right on.
Woo!
Yes. Solid.
Now we have Shavana from Black Lives Matter.
I'm Shavana Newsom, the Director of Operations for Black Lives Matter, Greater New York, and I stand here in solidarity with Yama, and I stand here in support of Congresswoman Omar. It's a shame that a woman who worked so hard and climbed the ranks, who's a United States representative, could be treated with so much disrespect. I'm appalled that other government officials have not come out, have not stood by us to tell the Post that the hate and fear that it spreads must stop. We must stop platforms like this. I'm here and happy that we're a united front. There are Muslims on this board, there are Christians on this board. I'm a black woman and I stand in solidarity with everyone to stop buying the Post, to boycott the New York Post, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Right on.
Right on. All right, thank you. That's all for our speakers. We're going to go open it up now for Q&A. If there are questions, we welcome questions from you. Any questions? All right.
You mentioned the loss of revenue from the sales. Is that revenue for the Post or revenue for the bodegas?
The loss is actually for the New York Post. The Yemeni American bodegas who are boycotting are doing it with great pride. They don't need money from a hate manufacturer. So, all right.
You mentioned the loss of revenue from the sales. Is that revenue for the Post or revenue for the bodegas?
The loss is actually for the New York Post. The Yemeni American bodegas who are boycotting are doing it with great pride. They don't need money from a hate manufacturer, so they're proud to actually be losing that funding and costing the New York Post $270,000.
Right on. Yeah.
Are you thinking of any legal actions?
We are not thinking of any legal actions, and the reason for that is it's very difficult based on freedom of speech, which we 100% support, but there's always that line that the New York Post crosses, and so that's why we are out here to make our voices heard and take an economic step against the New York Post.
Dr. Debbie, can I say something?
Sure.
The First Amendment was touched upon, and yes, people speech, but we have a right to react, and they shall feel the repercussions for spewing hate.
Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great job. Great job.
Who am I giving this to?
There were filters on here as I was recording, and they only recorded part of it. So take a look at it.
okay.
I couldn't figure out how to get through them.
Okay.